So in the last class, we looked at water pollution, and we discussed this slide also. We discussed this slide, so the effect of water pollution. So we looked at what eutrophication is. Then we also saw that acidic water is not good. We need alkaline water. So similarly, acidic water, if it falls on agricultural land, then it decreases the fertility because even plants need alkaline soil to grow. Then there is food chain so we also saw there is that aesthetic value of the water also decreases, because if it is a brown, if you are given brown color water for drinking, obviously it won't be pleasing. Clear? So uh, pollution also affects the aesthetic value of water. Aesthetic value means the acceptable water, acceptable value. And the last one is a food chain contamination. Clear? So let's look at how it causes food chain contamination. Okay, so now we are last lecture we looked at this important concept of eutrophication. Clear? Now uh, pay attention to bioaccumulation and biomagnification. Okay, so what did we see? Excess fertilizers, so excess nitrate and excess phosphates, if they enter into the water and they cause a green mat, so if they cause a heavy growth of algae, then it is going to cause eutrophication. Clear? Now what happens if there is a lot of pesticides? If there is a lot of pesticides into the entering into the water body, then what happens? It causes something called as bioaccumulation and biomagnification. Okay, so what happens? Pesticides, they enter into the water body, and then from that water body they enter into the aquatic food chain. Clear? Like for example, the phytoplanktons, they need water for growth, right? So they absorb that water, they absorb that contaminated water. Now whatever toxins were absorbed by these phytoplankton, because aquatic plants will feed on phytoplanktons, that pesticide, it gets transferred to the aquatic plant. Now when the fish eat the aquatic plant, that pesticide again it gets transferred to the fish. Clear? Now if this fish is again eaten by some water birds, right, then that pesticide will again transfer from the fish into the water bird. Clear? So I have written a aquatic food chain here. So what happens? Even the primary producer, if it gets contaminated with some pesticide toxin, then that toxin, it passes through each of the link in the food chain. Clear? So the food chain that I've written here is phytoplanktons, aquatic plants, fish, and in turn the water birds. Is that clear? So what happens when you move from one level to another level, from the consumer to the producer in the food chain, these toxic chemicals, clear, these toxic chemicals, sometimes they do not pass out of the body. So sometimes, say, the phytoplanktons or the aquatic plants, they do not flush it out of their system. Then what happens? They do not pass out of the body and they get accumulated inside their body, inside their plant tissues or inside the aquatic tissues, and therefore it causes bioaccumulation. Yeah, so bioaccumulation is nothing but the concentration of or the accumulation of toxic substances in biological entities. Clear? So here, let's say it gets accumulated in the fish. Is that clear? Now what happens when the fish dies? Clear? Or when the water bird has eaten this fish, because it has uh, because it has shown increasing concentration, because it is in the third level, it is in the third trophic level. What happens? The concentration of this toxic chemical, it gets increased, it gets biomagnified, and therefore the water birds, it gets the highest concentration of that pesticide. Is that clear? Because the lower trophic levels, they are unable to discharge it outside from their body. Okay, so this is called as biomagnification. So when the toxic elements, they get bioaccumulated in the lower trophic levels, what happens? A characteristic increase in concentration is seen. Clear? Now when it passes to the topmost level, when it passes to the tertiary consumer, that level gets magnified. Clear? This is called as biomagnification. Is that clear? So bioaccumulation and biomagnification, is something that occurs in the is something that contaminates your food chain. Is that clear? So this point here where we said that the effect of water pollution is the food chain contamination, how does it happen? It happens through these two phenomenon, which is called as bioaccumulation and biomagnification. Is that clear? Now let's look at an example here. For example, if you apply pesticides, right, like DDT. So remember, DDT today it is banned. Okay, it is not applied anymore in the farms. But initially, when DDT or endosulfan was introduced, what used to happen is that the birds used to lay eggs with shells that are much thinner, clear, than normal. And there, because DDT used to affect the membrane integrity of the shells of these birds. Is that clear? Now, how did DDT enter into the birds? It is again through your terrestrial food chain. Clear? So it entered into the grass. From the grass, it might have entered into the grasshopper, and that grasshopper or worms must have been eaten by birds. Clear? So that is how it passed from one trophic level to another trophic level. And therefore this DDT, it started bioaccumulating in the food chain, and when it reached the top consumer of the birds, then there was biomagnification. Clear? And therefore the birds, they received a very concentrated amount of this DDT. Clear? And what was the side effect, or what was the ill effect, is that the birds, they started laying very thin shells. Clear? And if the shells of the birds eggs, if they are very thin, then obviously they can break. And if they break, then it will kill the young ones which are inside the eggs. Clear? So the life of these birds, it started decreasing. Now remember, also a lot of birds, as in, for example, in Maharashtra, a lot of ostriches, sorry, a lot of vultures, vulture population started decreasing in the 80s and 90s, is because of this phenomenon of DDT only. Clear? Because of the phenomenon of this bioaccumulation and biomagnification is what happened. The vultures, they used to get a lot of heavy amounts of some medicine which was used to treat uh, a lot of these cows, right? So cows were given with some veterinary medicine to increase their milk production. Clear? But when it reached the trophic level of the vultures, it was harmful for the vultures, and therefore a lot of vultures started dying, and the vulture population, it shifted to being critically endangered. Clear? So that is another example of bioaccumulation. Is that clear? So remember that even if the water is contaminated, if the soil is contaminated, it is going to be transferred from one producer to the entire food chain. Okay, so even if the bottom producers get contaminated, remember that it is going to transfer to the topmost topmost trophic level. Okay, is that clear? That is nothing but bioaccumulation and biomagnification. So it is very essential that we check soil pollution or we check water pollution. Okay, now what is the role of individuals and what are the control measures for water pollution? So it is very simple. So I leave it to you. You can write about this, but I have jotted down a few points like flooding. There can be runoff. Obviously, there should be forest cover. There should be sand filtration. Then there can be some sewage treatment plants, or there can be floodplains or flanges. Yeah, so all of this is used to check water pollution. Now, obviously, this list is not complete. Okay, but this control measures topic is very simple, and therefore I want you to think about innovative control measures for water pollution. Is that clear? But here I will, yes, so I will discuss one method of control of water pollution, which is through your sewage treatment. Is that clear? Now all these other methods or other control measures is something that you look up, and we will discuss these innovative measures that you come up with. Clear? That is why even I have given one topic of your presentations, right? Remember, presentations, they are for 15 marks, right? And so one of the topics given there is uh, river pollution in India. Clear? So you know that rivers, there are a lot of major rivers in India. India is an agrarian country, so we depend on these rivers to get a lot of water into our canals also. Clear. So but you know that they are heavily polluted. So there is this Namami Gange program, or the national river water conservation plan. Clear. So that is why one of the topics of your presentation has been given as your river pollution. Clear. So there we will study about some innovative methods which are used by society or by the government to tackle river pollution. Clear. So that is why I have not included river pollution in today's lecture. Clear. Now, but what we are going to be what we are going to be looking at is the method of sewage treatment, or the method of uh, cleaning cleaning of water. Clear. So this is how it is done. Now remember that to reduce the pollution load, right, in the water, what you have to do is there are three methods. So there are actually two stages. So the first stage is called as a primary treatment, and the second is a secondary treatment. Okay. Now what is the aim of this? What is the aim of purification here? Is that we want it to be done in such a way that it will reduce the BOD. Okay, so we have to reduce the biological oxygen demand of the final water, okay, of the final uh, product, right, which will be discharged into the river. Yeah. So industries, they follow this technique, or your sewage treatment plants, they follow this technique so as to treat the water, and then it is released into the river, lake, or ocean that you can see here. Okay, so you always treat water first. Now we are going to be looking at how it is treated. Okay. Now the first here you can see is the first is the primary treatment. Okay. Now these primary treatments, what do they use? So they use a lot of physical processes, like for example screening. So you can see here bar screening and settling tank. Clear. So what does it do? uh, so what does it screen? So for example, whichever pollutants they are too large to pass through that screen, these will not be channeled in the next stage. Clear. So they will be removed here at the first stage itself. Like for example, you have stones or sticks or some rags, right, or some material if it clogs a lot of pipes. Clear. So will be that will be taken out at the first stage itself. Is that clear? Then after screening, uh, is that clear? So the first stage here you can see itself here. So whatever heavy material was there, that was removed from the water, so it gets a little purified. Then next stage it goes into the grit chamber. Is that clear? So after the screening, the second stage here is the grit chamber. Now in this grit chamber, what happens? That there is a detention time. Clear. So the water is stored in the grit chamber long enough to allow lighter and organic matter to settle. Clear. So here these two tanks, they use sedimentation. So what happens? The water is kept here, and the whatever pollutants are there which still remained after the bar screening, they are sedimented. Clear. So therefore the whatever heavy material was present, heavy pollutants was present there, the heavy organic material, that is settled. Is that clear? Now in the settling tank, what happens? The flow speed is reduced sufficiently. Clear. Why? Because the suspended solids, obviously they settle by gravity. And now what happens in this total primary treatment? So in this total primary treatment, it is estimated that about 35% of the biological oxygen demand is reduced. Is that clear? So remember, in the last lecture we spoke about lower the BOD, greater is the purification. Is that clear? So in the primary tank, in the primary process itself, by using these three chambers, we are reducing the BOD to we are reducing BOD by 35%. Yeah. So whatever 60% is left, that BOD will again be reduced in the secondary tank, in the secondary treatment. Now what is again what happens in the secondary treatment again? So the objective of this is again to remove all of the BOD, clear, to remove all of the biological oxygen demand, clear, and to keep it to a very minimum. Now remember that in secondary treatment, there are three types of secondary treatment. Okay, now in this image that I have taken here is the most common one in is the activated sludge process. So there are three types of secondary treatment processes. So the first one is called as a trickling filter process. The second one is the activated sludge process, which we are going to see here. And the third important one is the oxidation pond. Okay, so because activated sludge is a very common process, I have included that image here. Is that clear? Now, what is this sludge? Clear? What is this sludge digester? And what happens here is we are going to take the help of different bacteria, different microorganisms to reduce the pollutants. Is that clear? And to reduce the BOD. So what do we do? Now in this sewage, in this whatever sewage or whatever water it got pumped into that, what happens that it is we put in a lot of healthy bacteria there, right? So a bacteria, so sludge is nothing but bacteria. Is that clear? So, and that is called as activated bacteria, because these bacteria, they act on the sewage or the bacteria, they act on the pollutant to degrade it. That is why it is called as activated bacteria, right? So these bacteria, this sludge, it facilitates degradation, clear, by microorganisms. So this water that goes into the sedimentation tank or in the settling tank, in the next image that you can see, what happens is that the microorganisms, they break down, clear, in the air, in the tank, and they release they release a lot of methane. Yes, the organic matter or the whatever sewage was present in that water, it is now converted into methane, and also a minor product of carbon dioxide, but it's converted into methane. Is that clear? And that this methane is now useful, so you can use methane for biogas. Is that clear? Now whatever digested sludge is there, now that is normally pumped into the drying bed, clear. So this is drying bed. Is that clear? So whatever sludge remained from converting the sewage into the methane, that sludge was later taken into a drying bed. Now this dry bed, it will be used, it will be disposed of into a landfill, clear, or it will be applied to a cropland, pasture, or whatever, and it can be used as a, it can, because it is nothing but digested bacteria. Is that clear? And it can be used as a good source of manure. Is that clear? So in this whole process, you're getting biogas from methane here, and you're also getting manure. So clear? So this whole process is also useful, doubly useful actually. Clear? Now what happens? The water in the settling tank, in the last stage here, it is almost purified, clear, but as a safety precaution, what do? We add chlorine, or we also use ozone and UV. In America they use ozone. Is that clear? So here you use chlorine or ozone or UV to further disinfect that water. Is that clear? And then this water is now considered as healthy water or pollution free water, which is now uh, transferred to rivers, lakes, or oceans. Is that clear? So remember that in in the primary screening, there is screening and sedimentation, and in secondary process there is in the secondary process there is treatment of that sewage by microorganisms, which releases methane and which releases a dry bed. Both of that can be used as manure, and whatever purified water you get, that is again treated by chlorine, or that is disinfected, and then that is used, that is later transferred to rivers, lakes, or oceans. Is that clear? So this is a very integral method of purification, clear. That is why we have studied it in detail. Is that clear? Now the other processes of trickling filter, and oxidation ponds, they are not so common, but obviously they are used to, they are also used, but they require a large amount of land, right? So that sewage treatment plant or the water treatment plant, it requires a large amount of land, because the oxidation ponds, so they are like your swimming tanks. Okay, so obviously it requires a lot of area. Clear? So activated sludge treatment process is more commonly used. Exactly. So this is how your water is purified or your sewage is treated in these sewage treatment plants. Okay. So I think we have discussed that in detail. Now the last topic that remains is your marine pollution. So what is this marine pollution? So the introduction of harmful substances into the marine environment that interfere with the functioning of the marine ecosystem. Clear? And therefore it makes it unfit for sustaining human life. Sorry, sustaining aquatic life is called as marine pollution. Is that clear? So it causes a lot of, it decreases the quality of seawater and it decreases the quality of aquatic life. Okay. Now what is again important? So what are the causes of marine pollution? Runoff and direct discharge, obviously, because you know that the rivers, the polluted rivers, they eventually they enter into the ocean. Clear? So if the river is itself polluted, then it is going to cause marine pollution by direct discharge. Then the second cause is deep sea mining, offshore oil exploration and extraction. Is that clear? And related to this again is tanker operations and accidents. So we already saw the accident of Exxon in the previous lecture. Clear? So tanker operations, because they can cause leakage of oil. Okay. Then there is ship pollution. So there is a ballast water and a bilge water. So you look up the images of this. Okay. So that is nothing but that is a structure of the ship. Clear? So when the ship moves from one place to another, it can cause pollution. And lastly also nuclear power plants. Clear? So discharge of nuclear waste into the oceans also causes a lot of pollution. Clear? So there is also spillage from oil rigs, right? There can be spillage from oil pipelines and from tankers. So that is your tanker operations and accidents. Is that clear? So you know that because ships, they carry a lot of toxic substances also, like for example they carry oil, they carry pesticides, they carry industrial chemicals. Okay. So and remember that they carry these in huge tons, right? So that is why ship accidents, they are very, or leakages, they can be very damaging to the marine environment. Okay, so the shipping channels at the entrance to the ports, right, they require frequent dredging. Clear? Because you want to allow the ship to enter into the port, and this dredging can also cause contamination of the seawater. Clear? So this whole sea mining, tanker operations, oil exploration is a very potent cause of marine pollution. Is that clear? So these are the images that again show you the same thing which I have explained earlier, is that they are causing a lot of pollution. Okay. And it is something that it is inevitable, right? Because we know that half of the world production of crude oil, right, it is transported by sea. Okay, so we don't, so we have a lot of oil production in the Middle East, right? So there is something called as OPEC, OPEC. So you look up what is OPEC. So they are oil, so they are petroleum exporting countries. Yeah, so look up which countries are under OPEC. Is that clear? So these countries, what they do is obviously they are going to be transporting by sea. Clear? So when it unloads the cargo, what happens? It is going to cause contamination. When it loads the cargo, also again it can cause contamination. Clear? So there is a lot of uh, pollution to the ocean because of these tanker operations. Is that clear? Or sometimes there can be uh, dry, there can be dry docking also sometimes when the ship it comes for just all the ships, it needs dry docking for, repairs and cleaning and etc. That time also it can cause pollution. Is that clear? So what is the right? So this is the image that we saw. Then why is it bad? Why is marine pollution bad? Is because it causes a lot of harm. Okay, so what are those? So apart from, we already discussed eutrophication. So apart from that, it can also can also result in a lot of red tides. So here you can see this image here. So what is this? It is nothing but they are phytoplankton blooms. Clear? But sometimes what happens? They are nothing but they're of that color. Clear? So those phytoplanktons are red in color. Is that clear? But sometimes when they combine with oil, right, they develop this sort of a color. Is that clear? So that is called as a red tide, and therefore that is the effect of oil pollution. Obviously there is oxygen depletion and acidification, which causes the death of the wildlife. And here you can see coating of aquatic birds by oil. Okay, because and then it also blocks sunlight from penetration into the continental shelf, and therefore that causes less oxygen into the continental shelf, which again decreases the aquatic life diversity. Choking of marine life and effect on birds is the same thing that we saw here. Clear? We also saw what a oil slick was. Yeah, so oil slick is nothing but okay, so we saw oil slicks, right? So when liquid oil it gets spilled onto the ocean, it spreads over the surface of the water, right, to form a very thin film which is called as an oil slick. Okay, so not only your oceans but also your mangroves, right, your salt marshes, they also trap oil. Okay, and therefore that ecosystem also gets affected. Is that clear? Now if there is a lot of drilling activity also, then that creates a lot of deoxygenated conditions, and what can happen is from the seabed a lot of toxic gases can escape, especially your toxic sulfides, and they will eliminate the bottom dwellers. Clear? So remember that in any aquatic ecosystem there are three kinds of layers. So one is the top layer, one is a middle layer, and one is the bottom layer. So in the top layer of the aquatic life, they need oxygen. Clear? So your dolphins etc, they are top layers. Then in the bottom layer they can be they are able to live without any oxygen, and they are able to grow in a dark area because there is no penetration of sunlight into the bottom layers. Clear? So those fish, they are called as benthic benthic fish, benthic, which means that they are bottom dwellers, which means that they don't need oxygen and they don't need light. Is that clear? Whereas the top layer, they need oxygen and they also need light, because you know that light will penetrate into the top layer. Okay, so based on the layers, different aquatic life is classified. Okay, now also one of the effects of marine pollution is your economic damage, because you know that if there is a lot of fish and shellfish contamination, then obviously their economic value decreases, and therefore it affects the flavor of the fish. Clear? So it might give the fish a unpleasant smell, or it can give it an unpleasant color, which might affect its commercial value in the market. Is that clear? And sometimes if it also it gets contaminated like mercury in the fish, then it is going to affect the nutrient value. Clear? And therefore the market value of seafood, it also gets reduced. Is that clear? So uh, and countries like Japan, right, which is totally dependent on a lot of marine diet, get affected by this. Is that clear? So in the topic of marine pollution, it is a short topic, but remember that you need to know what are the causes of marine pollution. So and you need to talk about uh, offshore oil exploration, extraction, tanker operations in detail, and you need to know what are the effects of that. Is that clear? Now for your homework, you look up control measures for water pollution, some innovative methods, and some innovative methods for control of marine pollution. Okay, that is important again because we have to be ensuring that we have a lot of innovative methods. Is that clear? Now after this, in our next class we will be looking at noise pollution, and we will also be looking at some case studies, right? So here we saw the case study of Exxon, and we saw the case study of arsenic poisoning in West Bengal. So in our next class we will be looking at noise pollution, and very important again is thermal pollution. So I already spoke about thermal pollution in this lecture, right? So we already saw how warm water is going to affect the biodiversity of the existing water body. Clear? So when we spoke about that, but we have to look at thermal pollution in a bit detail.